Rain dripped softly from the low-hanging pipes of the lower quarter, casting shimmering reflections onto the cracked glass windows of the apothecary where Raylith spent her days. The smell of lavender, soot, and something faintly metallic clung to the air like a second skin. Outside, the floating towers of Navarra cast long shadows over the poorer sectors far below. This was where the Forgotten lived. Where silence meant safety. Raylith moved carefully among her herbs, pale fingers brushing over dried thistle and calming root as if the act could anchor her. She wore a simple wrap of dark cloth, hood always up, eyes always lowered. Nothing drew attention faster than pride. "Mama," Taven's voice broke through her ritual. She turned and offered him a small smile. 10 years old, curious beyond reason, with storm-gray eyes that reminded her too much of the man she'd lost. "There's a soldier talking to Madame Alvey. They're asking about missing names." Her stomach clenched. Were they looking this way? He shook his head. "But I listened. They said something about a list, names erased." Raylith crouched and placed her hands on her son's shoulders. "You must never listen to enforcers, Taven. Especially when they speak of names." "But Mama, why are names so dangerous? Why would they be burned from the records?" She hesitated. She had always promised him honesty, but there were things that were meant to be carried in silence. Because sometimes, truth can set a fire they can't put out. His small brow furrowed. "Like Papa's name?" Her breath hitched, but she nodded. That night, when the lights of Navarra glittered above them like indifferent stars, Taven lay awake listening to the creaks of the apothecary, the wind, and the deeper silence in his mother's chest. A silence so heavy, it begged to be broken. The night air clung to the stones like breath held too long. Taven crept beneath the spires of Navarra's western quarter, careful not to let the torchlight from the patrols catch the glint of his boots. The council's soldiers moved like shades now, watchers of silence, not order. And Taven was no longer just a curious son grieving a vanished mother. He was a question they could not afford anyone to ask. He had been trailing Minister Havek for 3 days. The man spoke little, walked less, and spent most of his time behind thick doors and within thicker lies. But tonight, Havek had moved alone, wrapped in a dull cloak, his presence almost shrinking as he slipped away from the governor's hall. Taven followed, ducking from pillar to ruin, shadow to stair. The path led down a forgotten alley lined with soot-stained carvings of Navarra's founders. Havek pressed a hand against a wall that looked no different from the others, except it whispered. Taven, hidden behind a broken water trough, heard the faintest hum before the stone split and receded, revealing a passage that inhaled Havek whole. Then the wall closed again. Taven waited a breathless minute. Then another. Then he stood and approached the wall. There was no handle. No lever. But the whisper was still there, like a song buried beneath layers of dust. He pressed his hand against the cool stone. It was smooth, too smooth for the rough-hewn stone that surrounded it. Something clicked. With a low groan, the wall peeled inward. He ducked inside. The air shifted. It was damp and heavy with time, like stepping into the lungs of an ancient beast. The tunnels below Navarra's foundations were older than any above-ground records admitted. His torch flickered in the dark, dancing across crumbling murals. He saw stars. Eyes. A woman holding out a flame to a crowd. Beneath her, crude lettering, "Truth does not die." Footsteps. Taven froze. "I thought I heard you." A man emerged from the shadows, his eyes sharp beneath a hood of worn leather. He held no weapon, but his posture was as steady as a drawn bow. "You're not Havek," the man said. "I'm not," Taven replied. "And you're not surprised?" "No. You've been close. You smell of questions." The man stepped forward, his cloak brushing the stone. "I'm Karn. If you've come this far, you deserve answers. Come." Taven followed him through a series of winding paths, each more broken than the last. Along the way, Karn spoke little, only pointing once to a spot where a ceiling had collapsed. Bombing raid. Years ago. They buried history, but not all of us. They arrived at a low chamber lit by soft green fire, the kind produced by bioluminescent moss. There sat a woman draped in layers of pale fiber. Her eyes were pale and clouded, but her head turned to Taven with unsettling precision. "Karn," she said, her voice like old parchment, "you've brought her son." Taven's heart stopped. "You knew my mother." "I walked with her," she said. "I am she. Once, they called me elder. Now, they only call me forgotten." She motioned for him to sit. Karn brought him a stone cup filled with something herbal and bitter. She leaned forward. "Your mother was a storm wrapped in calm. A leader of the kind that does not shout. She led the lantern assembly. Peaceful. Persistent. Dangerous to tyrants. I was told she disappeared in a shuttle fire," Taven said. "No body. Because they didn't burn her. They buried her name instead." She reached into a bundle beside her and pulled out a faded image, a hollow scrap that shimmered when held to the moss light. It showed Taven's mother standing before a small crowd, a datapad in her hand, his father at her side. "They tried to scatter us. Your father refused to give her up. He died for that love. She was taken. Rewritten in the archives as a traitor." Taven's throat tightened. He stared at the image. At the two people he never truly knew. "Why tell me now?" "Because you're the last with their blood who still walks free. And because the regime is weaker than it pretends." Karn added, "And because you followed the lie into the dark. That means you're ready for the truth." Taven looked at the tunnels around him. Symbols etched in hidden walls. Voices whispering from crumbled relics. He saw now, it wasn't just a tunnel system. It was a vein of buried truth. He rose slowly. "Then I'll uncover everything. Not just for them. For Nivara." Karn nodded. "It won't be easy." She smiled softly. "It never is. But it's time." As Taven stepped out of the chamber and into the winding darkness again, he no longer moved like a shadow's echo. He moved like purpose. Like fire in a place long starved of heat. The walls no longer whispered. They waited, for a voice to make them sing again. He square bloomed with color and noise. Towering banners shimmered under the high sun, their golden sigils rippling like waves over the crowd of gathered citizens. The loyalty celebration had returned to Nivara with all its engineered pomp and precision. Streamers spun from the towers, trumpets blared the ancient anthem, and all around the plaza, the people's youth circled with polished boots and stitched smiles. Taven stood still amid the tide of bodies, a student badge pinned crookedly to his chest, his eyes focused on the grand dais where Overseer Malvek loomed. He could feel his pulse in his throat. "Your name's still not on the schedule," Raelith whispered beside him, her silver-laced tunic tight with nerves. "Did you bribe someone?" "No," Taven said quietly. "I just rewrote the roster before it was finalized." Raelith's brows shot up. "You're insane." "No," he repeated, watching Malvek. "I'm ready." The student poetry competition had been a tradition for nearly a century, intended to celebrate national pride and the creative brilliance of Nivaran youth. Today, it was Taven's weapon. His name was called third. The crowd quieted as he ascended the dais, a single piece of paper in hand. He didn't glance at Malvek as he passed. Didn't need to. The man's aura of control radiated like heat. "Student Taven Lore," announced the herald. "Of New Dawn Secondary." He stood at the podium, eyes scanning the faces, so many, too many. But he only needed to reach a few. His voice, when it came, was steady. "This is a piece titled The Burned Name." A silence settled as Taven began to read. "In the time before banners, there lived a name we do not speak. She wove peace into our wounds. And taught silence to bloom. Her voice was ash. Her hands, erased. The halls forgot her footfalls. But not the fire she left behind. They buried her beneath the records. Rewrote her in shadows. Gave her husband's death a parade. Gave her child a cage of words. But names do not burn clean. They ember. They wait. They carve themselves into stones. The regime forgets to break. I have remembered. I carry her ash in my mouth. And speak it now. Though the wind is thick with watchers. He looked up. Gasps echoed like dropped coins. A few scattered claps, then silence. Then came the sharp clack of boots. Overseer Malvek rose from his throne-like seat, his expression unreadable. Raelith, frozen near the side stairs, stared wide-eyed as two enforcers marched toward the dais. Taven Lore, Malvek's voice rang out, cold and exact, step down. But they didn't go for Taven. They turned. They went for Raelith. No, Taven whispered. She didn't know. She uploaded the roster file, Malvek said. She shared it with you. Aiding sedition. Raelith didn't fight. Her arms went limp as the enforcers gripped them. Taven, she cried as they dragged her. He stepped forward instinctively, but a dozen eyes had already landed on him, half wary, half astonished. Treason, Malvek declared to the now murmuring crowd. Cloaked in poetry. It will not be tolerated. The square held its breath. Taven slowly stepped back, letting the podium shield him again. My words are truth. Your words are poison, Malvek said. But even poison spreads slowly. He gestured, and Taven was allowed to leave the stage. As he walked through the crowd, no one clapped. No one stopped him. But they watched. And they whispered. By the fountain, a woman muttered, she wove peace into our wounds. Near the monument, a man said to another, they buried her beneath the records. And as Taven passed the edge of the square, a child asked his mother, what was the burned name? The loyalty celebration played on. But the silence between the trumpets had changed. That night, across Navarra, the poem spread like smoke. Untraceable. Uncontainable. Whispers found the cracks in the walls. The regime had taught its people not to look back. But Taven had given them something to remember. Something that burned. The cold light of Detention Complex 17 buzzed from the ceiling, a thin strip of luminescence that did nothing to warm the sterile gray cell. Raelith sat on the floor, her back pressed against the cold wall, wrists chained lightly in front of her. The metal restraints were ceremonial more than practical, they wanted her to know she was not free, not trusted, not safe. But she had known that long before the shackles. Across the narrow chamber, the observation slit remained shut, yet Raelith knew eyes watched her from the other side. They always did. Silence was their most efficient weapon, drawn out over hours, until the mind twisted and questioned itself. But Raelith had lived through silence before. She had walked through firestorms of betrayal and come out breathing. When Officer Lenya entered, she carried none of the arrogance that marked the other guards. Her steps were quiet, almost careful, her face unreadable beneath the regulation cap. She held a data pad and a small box, neither of which she acknowledged as she stepped into the cell. You haven't eaten, Lenya said, her voice lower than expected. Not kind, but not cruel either. Raelith didn't answer. Lenya knelt beside her and set the box down. Inside it, a ration pack, standard military fare, flavorless but nourishing. Why are you here, Officer Lenya? Raelith's voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made Lenya pause. I'm doing my duty, Lenya replied. No, Raelith said gently. You're not. You're here for something else. For a moment, Lenya said nothing. Then, slowly, she reached into her sleeve and withdrew a small metallic disc. It was no bigger than a coin, but its function was unmistakable to anyone who'd lived in the underground, a comlink. "Your son is alive," Lenya said. "And he's trying to find you." Rayletha's breath caught. She hadn't spoken Taven's name aloud in years, not since they dragged her into the black cells, not since the regime had erased her from the records. He entered the square during the loyalty celebration. Recited a poem that shook the plaza. They took him after. But he escaped. With help. Rayleth reached for the comlink with trembling fingers. Lenya placed it gently in her palm and stood. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, Lenya said, turning away. This didn't happen. When the door slid shut behind her, the silence felt different. Charged. Rayleth activated the disk, and after a few seconds, static cleared. "Mother?" Taven's voice. Tears slipped down Rayletha's cheeks without permission. "Taven." He sounded older, more weathered than she remembered, but the ache in his voice was unmistakable. "I found Karn. An elder she. They told me everything. I know what they did to you. What they did to father." Rayleth cradled the disk. "Your father never betrayed us. He died protecting the names of our people. I took the blame because they threatened you. You were just a child." "I remember," Taven said. "Your face that night. I thought you left me. But I understand now. I swear, I will get you out." "No," Rayleth said. "You must live. Do not sacrifice yourself for vengeance." "It's not vengeance," Taven said. "It's truth. People are starting to listen. They're scared, but they're waking up. Your name is a spark, Mother. They just need fire." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say aloud. Then Rayleth whispered, "I never stopped thinking of you. Every day, I dreamed of hearing your voice again." "I'm not going to let them keep us apart anymore," Taven said. "I promise." Rayleth closed her eyes, pressing the disk to her chest. Outside the cell, Lenya leaned against the wall, eyes closed. The echo of Rayletha's words, though muffled, reached her even here. She had been trained to shut out sentiment, to follow order above instinct. But something inside her had shifted. She remembered her own mother's voice. Soft lullabies during storms. Small rebellions whispered into her ear. With trembling hands, Lenya opened her datapad. Within it, she held full clearance to prisoner transport routes, movements, times, weak spots. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "What are you doing?" came a voice behind her. Lenya turned to find Lieutenant Krell, his eyes suspicious. Her breath caught. "Just reviewing prisoner logs," she said, tapping aimlessly at the pad. Krell stepped closer. "You've been visiting cell 17 more than regulation permits. You sympathetic to the ghost's cause, Lenya?" Lenya met his gaze. "No, sir. I'm doing my duty." Krell grunted and walked off. Lenya exhaled slowly. Then, without hesitation, she uploaded the route logs and encrypted them to Taven's signal. In a forgotten corner of the complex, a relay beacon pulsed, its data weaving into the resistance net. Change had begun. Back in the cell, Rayleth listened as Taven's voice faded. She knew time was short. But in those stolen minutes, something had healed. She wasn't alone anymore. And the walls of Detention Complex 17 no longer felt unbreakable. The city of Navarra pulsed with its usual rhythm, holographic banners fluttering in windless air, celebration residue still clinging to the monuments and plazas. But in the shadowed underlevels of the central archive, silence reigned. A hum of old servers throbbed beneath the floor, a rhythm only the desperate could hear. Taven moved swiftly through the narrow aisles, eyes scanning for markers elder she had described. Dust shimmered in the thin shafts of security light. Somewhere above, the tower readied for another loyalty broadcast. But tonight, Taven had a different transmission in mind. Lenya emerged from behind a stacked crate, a hood over her guard uniform. Her breath was quick, tight with nerves. "You have 15 minutes, she whispered, handing Taven a security key. "Once I insert this into the uplink terminal, everything will go live." "Are you sure this is going to work?" "It has to," Taven replied, voice low. "She's records contain the footage. The real history. The truth they tried to burn." From his satchel, he drew a data crystal etched with symbols, a relic from a time before surveillance, before Navarra's regime erased dissent with fire and silence. Elder, she had risked everything to hide it, and now the crystal trembled in Taven's fingers like a heartbeat. "Where is he?" Lenya asked. "In the safe room near the primary archive vault. He won't come further. Too many retinal scanners." They exchanged a look, then moved. Deep in the archive's central chamber, Taven slotted the crystal into an ancient terminal, its screen flickering with unstable light. Rows of redacted files bled across the interface, names erased, faces blurred, dates obscured. He overrode them with Elder She's codes. And there it was. Footage. Clear, old, untouched by propaganda. Raylith standing before a crowd, not with weapons but with words. Her voice firm, eyes burning with conviction. Speaking not of war, but of memory. Of justice. "We are not enemies of the state," she had said. "We are the soul it forgot." Images followed, executions staged to silence her followers, burned homes, civilians accused of treason for sheltering a child. Taven's throat tightened. His mother, younger, brighter, holding a toddler in one arm. Him. A tremor moved through his limbs. "Taven," Lenya called over comms. "I'm at the uplink. You ready? Do it. Now." Lenya slammed the key into the uplink slot. System surged. The tower's master screen darkened mid-loyalty speech. Across the city, every public square's feed turned to static. Then the footage began. The response was immediate. At first, confusion. Faces staring up from the plazas and balconies. Then recognition. Then fury. Guards tried to cut the feed, but Lenya had locked them out with an override. The entire city watched, helpless and transfixed, as Navarra's greatest betrayal played out in real time. Old allies of the resistance, now janitors, workers, broken men and women, wept openly. Youths who never knew Raylith as anything but a traitor saw her strength, her compassion, her loss. Protests ignited by the hour. Within the detention complex, chaos spread. Raylith sat chained to the wall when the lights dimmed and the footage played across the cell display. She gasped. Taven's voice echoed from a city away. "My mother is not a criminal. She is the memory they could not destroy. And I am her witness." A hush. Then roars. Metal doors shook. Detainees screamed her name. Raylith wept. They came for her before midnight. Not enforcers. Protesters. Former guards who had once obeyed the regime's silence. And Lenya, leading them through the smoke and confusion. Taven was there. His coat torn, blood on his brow from where a guard's rifle but had clipped him earlier. He didn't care. "Mother," he breathed. Raylith stepped into the light, her chains broken, her hands trembling. "You look just like him," she whispered. They embraced. For the first time in decades, Navarra's sky saw her unshackled. Hours later, they stood atop the public broadcast tower. Below them, thousands filled the square. Banners with painted symbols, the old ones, the ones Raylith had carried in her youth, fluttered like phoenix wings. Smoke and fire still flickered from distant corners of the city, but this was something new, a crowd not burning in rage, but awakening in hope. Elder she arrived slowly, leaning on a carved cane, blind eyes lifted to the sky. "It is done," he said. "She lives in truth now. Raelith stepped forward to the edge, the tower's speakers still hers. Taven stood beside her. She raised her hand. You once knew me by a name they burned. They struck it from the records, the stones, the scrolls. But you remembered. Or your hearts did. I am Raelith, daughter of Navarra, and I stand unafraid. The crowd erupted. Lenya leaned against the railing nearby, tears streaking her soot-covered cheeks. Taven took his mother's hand. No more hiding. No more silence. Not for them. Not ever again.